Before moving to video, I am sorry guys for not uploading video from last few days. There was some issue with my voice. I will be regular within next few days. Welcome back guys to Fear Begins. In today's episode I am sharing 10 disturbing, true feral people encounters from deep Appalachia. By the end, you might think twice before hiking too deep into those silent woods or camping off-grid. Before we begin, please consider, and don't forget to like the video and share with your close friends and family. I would also love to hear where you are listening from. Thank you all for the support. It means a lot to me. Now let's start. My name is Kyle, and this happened back in 2014. I was a forestry student working with the Department of Natural Resources in eastern Kentucky. We were deep in the Appalachian range, studying tree growth, mapping wildlife routes, all that technical stuff. But I'll tell you something no textbook ever prepared me for. Something wild and wrong was watching us in those woods. Something that should not have been there. Something not quite animal, not quite human. We had set up camp just a few miles off the gravel fire road. It was remote, silent, no cell service, no people for at least 15 miles. We were a team of 4 students and one supervisor named Dave. Dave was ex-military, tough guy. Nothing rattled him, or so I thought. The first day was normal. We hiked out, marked some tree lines, spotted a black bear print, took some samples, all routine. The weather was clear. The forest smelled like wet moss and pine sap. But even then, I felt off, like I was being watched. I kept turning around expecting to see something, but there was never anything there. At least nothing I could see. That night we sat around the campfire, telling dumb stories and passing around beef jerky. The firelight flickered against the dark wall of trees surrounding us. Then we heard it. A low whistle. It came from the ridge above us, like someone trying to get our attention. Dave froze mid-sentence. He held up a hand. We all went quiet. The whistle came again, long drawn out, not like a bird or animal. It sounded deliberate. Probably another group, someone said. But Dave shook his head. There shouldn't be anyone else out here, he said quietly. We got the permit. Nobody else is allowed on this land this week. Then came the sound of movement, soft shuffling through the underbrush above the ridge. Just far enough that we couldn't see it, but close enough we could hear the crunch of dry leaves. Snap, snap. It circled us, slow and steady, never revealing itself. That night, none of us really slept. Dave stayed up with his rifle across his lap. I kept hearing faint footsteps near my tent, and what sounded like breathing, heavy, rasping. Too human to be a bear. Too big to be a coyote. Too wrong to be anything natural. In the morning, Dave found tracks near our camp. Bare feet, human-sized, but too wide. The toes looked off. Longer than normal, curved like claws. One of the prints had blood in it. A smear. Like something had cut its foot but didn't care. Dave didn't say much. He just said, "Pack up. We're moving 2 miles down the trail." No one argued. We hiked quietly. Every twig snapped behind us made me flinch, but the woods stayed eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. By dusk we set up our new camp, this time closer to a stream. Dave said the running water might give us a better heads up if something approached. I think he was trying to keep us calm, but his eyes kept scanning the tree line. He was scared too. That night it returned. We heard it just after midnight. A low gurgling sound, like someone trying to speak through water. It came from just beyond the tree line. Then something hit one of the tents, hard, like a rock or a hand. A scream erupted as one of the students dove out, said he saw a face pressed up against the mesh. He said the eyes were sunken, white, no pupils, and the skin was pale like raw meat. It smiled at him. He swore it smiled. Dave shouted for everyone to grab their packs. We didn't even take the tents. We ran blindly into the dark forest, our flashlights bouncing in all directions. Behind us, I heard something crashing through the trees, following us, but never getting closer. It wanted us scared. It wanted us to know it could catch us, but it didn't. We hiked for 4 hours until we found the fire road, collapsed by the edge, and waited for sunrise. Dave got on the emergency radio. We were airlifted out by the afternoon. The Forestry Service never asked us to go back, and Dave resigned 2 weeks later. He would not talk about what we saw, just called it something old that does not want to be found. A year later, I looked into the area. Locals have their own stories. They call them Ridge Watchers. Said they were once people who fled into the mountains centuries ago, during some plague or war. Over time they changed, lost language, lost humanity, but never lost the hunger. To this day, I cannot hear a whistle without flinching, because I know sometimes out there in the deep woods, something whistles back, something that should not exist, and it waits, still watching from the ridge. I was 22, and what I am about to tell you happened in the fall of 2017, in the southern stretch of West Virginia, right in the heart of the Appalachians. I was an amateur spelunker, cave explorer. I loved the thrill of going underground where most people never dared to go. It felt like discovering secrets left untouched for centuries. But this time, what I found was never meant to be uncovered, and I barely made it out alive to tell the tale. A friend of mine named Colton had found a collapsed mine shaft on an old topo map. It was deep in the hills, about 6 miles from the nearest dirt road. The map dated back to the 1930s, and the shaft hadn't been used in decades. It was marked as unstable, which to us just meant untouched. We packed gear, headlamps, ropes, emergency radios, and hiked out early one morning. It was beautiful. Orange leaves, crisp wind, the kind of day where the world feels wide open. We reached the entrance around noon. It was hidden behind thick vines and some rusted sheet metal. Definitely hadn't been entered in years. The opening was tight, barely wide enough to crawl through. And after 30 feet of squeezing down a jagged slope, it opened up into a huge cavern, bigger than we expected. The air was damp and old, heavy with that earthy decay of time. We dropped our gear and started exploring with headlamps. There were old rail tracks, broken crates, tools rusted to nothing. But it was what we found deeper inside that still keeps me awake. That thing, that woman, about an hour in. Colton wandered off toward a tunnel marked with a red X painted decades ago. I told him it probably meant, "Do not enter," but you know how people are, curiosity kills. He called back that he found something. His voice echoed weird, like it was bouncing around a much larger space than we expected. I followed him in, and that is when I saw her at first. It just looked like a bundle of fabric sitting in the dark. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. Kneeling in the corner of the cave, long stringy black hair hung over her face. Her limbs were too long, her hands, pale, thin, wrapped tightly around her knees. She looked like she had not seen light in decades. Her skin was colorless, veiny, like paper over bone. "Ma'am?" I asked. Colton turned his light on her and said, "What the hell is she doing down here?" Then her head twitched, not turned, twitched, like a glitch. Her neck cracked with emotion, and her eyes. God, her eyes were pure white, no pupils, no iris, just blank like boiled eggs. Then she opened her mouth, and it was not a scream. It was a click, a wet, violent clicking noise, like someone trying to speak but all the words were broken. The noise echoed down the tunnel, and we heard movement behind us, fast crawling movement. Colton panicked and ran. I tried to follow but slipped on the wet rocks. When I turned back, the woman was gone, vanished into the dark, but I heard her close behind me. Her breathing was shallow and inhuman. And I swear to God, I felt her fingers brush my ankle as I scrambled up. We both made it out somehow, running, crawling, clawing our way through the narrow shaft. We collapsed outside in the sunlight, gasping, bleeding, and terrified that night. I had a dream. I saw her face in the cave, only now her eyes were black, and her mouth kept clicking, but it was slower, more like speech, and I understood the last part. It said, "You came too deep. Now you will carry me with you." I woke up screaming. And Colton? He was not the same after that. He stopped talking to people, quit his job, moved into his dad's old trailer. He said he could still hear her at night, sometimes outside his window, sometimes under the floorboards. He boarded up his entire house. And then one day, he vanished. No note, no trace. Just gone. Sheriff's office looked around. They found scratch marks under his trailer, deep into the dirt, like fingernails clawing upward. Locals say there are women in the hills, women who were buried alive by mine collapses, or went mad waiting for their husbands to return. They say they went feral in the dark, became something else, something hungry. They live in the deepest parts of the caves now, where the sun has never touched, feeding on what stumbles in, or what they call to them. I do not go underground anymore, not after what I saw. And I never go near that hill again, because in the silence, I sometimes still hear the clicking, and I know she is waiting, still crouched in that dark corner, still whispering with broken words, waiting for the next voice, the next soul, and one day, she might come back out. I was 24, fresh out of college, just trying to escape the noise of everything. So I took a job in a place most people avoid, a conservation project in rural Kentucky, right at the foot of Miller's Creek, deep in Appalachian land, miles from any real town, a quiet, forested region where the fog clings to the trees and the sun never quite reaches the floor. It was beautiful, peaceful, but something about the silence out there never felt right. And after what I experienced, I will never set foot in those hills again. The job was simple: survey wildlife patterns, document water flow, track invasive species. Nothing exciting, but it gave me time to breathe, time to be alone. I was living in a small ranger cabin, no cell service, no internet, just an old radio and a dusty set of local maps that had not been updated in decades. Locals from the nearest town, a place called Raven Hollow, told me to stay on marked trails and never wander past the old fence line near Miller's Creek. They were real serious about that last one. An old man at the diner even grabbed my wrist and said, "You hear whistling at night? Don't whistle back." I thought he was just being dramatic, but now I know he meant it, every word of it. It was my third week in mid-October when I saw him for the first time, the pale boy. I was walking the creek bed, logging fish migration data, when something caught my eye up the ridge. At first, I thought it was a deer. Pale skin, thin frame, but when it stepped out from the trees, I froze. It was a boy, could not have been older than 10, but he was gaunt, all limbs and bones, wearing what looked like shredded old clothes. No shoes, no expression, just standing perfectly still with wide black eyes, watching me. I called out, "Hey, you all right?" No response. He just tilted his head slowly, like he did not understand the question. Then he dropped to all fours and darted back into the woods, fast, Too fast for any normal kid, I climbed the ridge, tried to follow the trail he left behind. But the moment I crossed that old rusted fence line the locals warned about, the woods changed. The air was thicker, quieter. Even the birds refused to chirp there. That night I had trouble sleeping. The silence outside was suffocating. No crickets. No owls, just stillness. And then I heard it. A faint whistle, not a tune, just a single note, long and slow, coming from the tree line behind the cabin. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I remembered the old man's warning. Don't whistle back. But something. In me, curiosity, stupidity, instinct, I do not know, I whistled back immediately. The whistle came again, closer, this time followed by a scraping sound, like bare feet dragging over leaves and gravel. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it through the back window, and there he was, standing just beyond the trees, the same pale boy, motionless, staring at me with that expressionless face. His mouth opened slowly, and the whistle came again. But his lips never moved, like it was coming from somewhere deeper, inside him or behind him. Then he did something that paralyzed me. He smiled, a slow, stretched grin that looked wrong on his small face. And in that moment, I knew this was not a boy, not anymore. This was something else wearing the shape of a child. Something old, hungry, and patient. The next morning, I reported the sighting to my supervisor over radio. He brushed it off. Probably a local kid messing around. But the locals knew better. When I told the waitress at Raven Hollow about what I saw, she went pale, put her hand on my shoulder and said, "You need to leave now, that ain't a kid. That's the one that whistles." Turns out, there's been stories for generations about a boy who drowned in Miller's Creek over 100 years ago. Slipped and cracked his head open on the rocks. They buried him near the water. But folks swear he never really left. They say he was taken by something in those woods, something that lives beyond the fence line, and that now he lures people in, mostly alone travelers, people no one would miss. With his whistle, I wanted to believe it was just folklore, but the next few nights made it impossible. Every evening, just after dark, the whistling returned, closer each time, sometimes at my window, sometimes under the cabin. One night I woke up and found muddy footprints on the floor, leading from the front door to my bed, and then back out into the woods. I started sleeping with a knife, boarded the windows, stopped going out past noon. But he was always there, watching from the woods, grinning, calling me. The final night, he came inside. I woke to the sound of breathing, shallow, raspy, right next to my bed. When I opened my eyes, he was crouched at the foot of the mattress. Eyes wide, that twisted smile stretched across his pale face. He leaned in and whispered, "You whistled back," then everything went black. I do not remember falling. I just woke up the next morning outside, lying in the creek, soaked, freezing, and covered in scratches. The cabin door was wide open. My things were untouched. But the floor had dozens of muddy footprints, all child-sized, leading in circles, over and over and over again. I packed my things that hour, hiked 12 miles through the woods without stopping, and never returned. The Forest Service sent someone to replace me, but he quit after a week, said the place gave him dreams of drowning. I have no doubt the boy visited him too. I still hear that whistle sometimes, late at night, even though I live 3 states away now, and when I do, I never respond, because once you answer, he follows you, and he does not leave, not ever. I was 33 when it happened. A late fall hiking trip gone so far off course, it still haunts me. I was not some casual trail walker either. I was seasoned, wilderness rescue volunteer, mapped over 200 miles of terrain by foot over the years, but none of that mattered in the woods I stepped into, because this stretch of Appalachian backcountry was not on any map. It was supposed to be a 3-day solitude hike through an abandoned ridge system in northern Georgia. Old fire roads, crumbled cabins, maybe a bear sighting or two. That kind of trip. I had my satellite communicator, my pack, bear spray, food for 5 days, redundant compasses, analog and digital. I was careful, but Appalachia is strange, and one wrong turn changes everything. The second day, mid-afternoon, I took a detour, just a slight shift to avoid a flooded, low area. I swear it was only 20 minutes off trail, but when I tried to return, there was no trail, no footprint, no familiar mark. I could not even backtrack my own boot prints. Like the forest had swallowed them whole. I was calm at first, followed elevation down, set up camp early, figured I would reorient in the morning, but that night, things felt wrong. Around 2 a.m., I heard the first snap of a branch, then another, not animals. These were heavy, purposeful, circling me, but never showing their faces. Then I heard breathing, deep, rattling breath just beyond the tarp, followed by a sound that still wakes me up at night, clicking, like bone tapping on bone, fast, intentional, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the dark, and that is when I saw it, just for a second. 2 figures standing side by side in the trees, tall, gaunt, bare-chested, even in the cold, their ribs visible through pale, almost bluish skin, long matted hair, eyes reflecting yellow like an animal. But worst was how still they stood like statues, until they both dropped to all fours at the same time and vanished into the brush without a sound. I did not sleep. I waited for morning and packed everything in record time. Started walking fast, not running, not yet, just fast enough to feel like I was getting somewhere, except I wasn't. The terrain never changed. It was like looping the same half-mile over and over again. The same fallen log, same twisted birch. Even when I veered hard left or right, the forest repeated. It felt like I was inside something. A trap, designed to confuse and exhaust. By mid-afternoon, I tried using my satellite beacon. It would not connect. Sky was clear. Device had battery, but no signal, not even static. Like something was blocking it. That night I made no fire. I slept with a knife in hand. Woke up twice to the sound of laughing. Not human laughing. Something was mimicking it, mocking it, and then came the voices. Dozens all around me. Whispers in tones that sounded close, but words I could not understand. Children's giggles 1 second, then deep, rumbling growls the next. At dawn I decided to run, all caution gone. I did not care about the pack, just the basics and my legs. I ran until my thighs burned and lungs felt like fire. And then, out of nowhere, the forest opened up, like a wall I had walked through, and suddenly I was back on the original trailhead. My truck was there, exactly where I left it, battery untouched, tires fine. Even the snacks I had left in the console were still warm from the sun. But here's the part that really messed me up. When I checked my watch, only 2 days had passed, but I had been in there for 6 days worth of food gone. Beard growth, weight loss, muscle fatigue. My body told the truth. Time had passed. But the world had not noticed. I went to a clinic after. Blood tests came back showing extreme malnutrition, mild dehydration, but no infection. No wild animal scratches, just a story no one could verify, and eyes that stared too long into the dark. I have not hiked since, and I never will, Because those things, whatever they were not lost. They were waiting. And I believe that stretch of the forest is not for us. It is theirs. And they let me go only, so I would tell you to stay out. I was 28 when I got stuck in the root cellar. This was not some tourist camping trip or YouTube survival stunt. This was real, raw, and it almost killed me. I was staying in an old family property deep in rural West Virginia, inherited from my great-uncle who passed without a will. A rotting old homestead with no neighbors for miles. The kind of house that was never on Google Maps. The kind where even the locals will not drive after dark. I had taken a week off work, brought tools, supplies, planned to patch it up a little, and assess whether it was salvageable. There was no power, no cell signal, just an old hand pump for water, creaking floors, and a feeling I could not shake. Like the woods were watching me, judging if I belonged. First 2 nights were fine. Cold, quiet, but manageable. Third night is when the scratching started. From under the floorboards, not mice, too slow, too deliberate. Like fingers dragging across the beams under my mattress, and then a thump, like something pushed up from below just once, enough to shake my cot. I tried not to panic, grabbed my flashlight, and checked the crawlspace access. It was latched shut. Heavy dust, no signs of entry, but I could feel the air down there, wet and stale, like something had been breathing in it for far too long. I decided to sleep in the truck that night. Just in case, come morning, I went out back to check the old root cellar. The door was cracked open, just barely, and the padlock split clean in half like it had been bitten through. That should have been enough. That should have been the sign to leave. But I was curious, too damn curious. I grabbed a lantern, drew my knife, and stepped down those damp stone steps. The air turned colder with every step, walls slick with moss, ceiling low, and the smell. Rotting meat, old wet dirt, and something else. Sweat, maybe human sweat, but old. Like it had soaked into the walls for decades. At the far end of the cellar, something moved. Not a rat. Too tall, too silent, and when I shined my light, nothing. Just shelves with broken jars and collapsed crates. But then I heard breathing, slow and ragged, and I saw fingerprints in the grime on the back wall, long, thick smears, like someone had been clawing at the stone from the inside. I turned to leave and the door above slammed shut. The lantern flickered, and something growled, low and guttural, not loud, but close, right behind me. I turned fast and saw 2 eyes reflecting in the dark, not glowing, just wet and wide, staring without. Blinking, then a hand, long and thin, with too many knuckles, reached out from behind a collapsed shelf and gripped the wall. It pulled itself closer without stepping, like it was dragging its body across the floor. I backed toward the stairs, started shouting, kicked at the door from underneath. Wood splintered, but it would not give. I felt fingers brush my boot, then grab it, tight, cold as stone. I kicked and screamed until I got loose. Ran full force into the door until the rusted hinges gave out, and I burst through into daylight. I did not stop running, not for the house, not for the truck. I ran down the mountain road for 2 hours until I flagged down a local logger. He asked if I had seen the things that live under the old Milner place. I told him everything. He did not seem surprised, just shook his head and said, "You're lucky they let you go. Sometimes they get curious. Sometimes they keep what they find. Sometimes they replace it with something else." I never went back. The deed is still in my name, but I do not claim it. That house belongs to them now, to whatever feral lives beneath those rotten floors, and If you ever find yourself near Milner Hollow and you hear tapping from below, do not answer, do not knock back, and for God's sake, never open the cellar. I was 19 when I made the worst decision of my life, taking a shortcut through Devil's Pike, that strip of twisted back road cutting through a forgotten stretch of Appalachia. Locals called it the Gap, a narrow one-lane trail winding between cliffs and dark forest. No lights, no guardrails, just miles of broken asphalt where cell signal died and the trees grew too close. I had heard the stories everyone had about the eyes in the trees, the whispers in the rocks, and the folks that went missing if they drove it after dark. But I was late, trying to get home from a college friend's cabin in Kentucky. The GPS froze halfway, and I figured, what the hell? Save 20 minutes and take the pike. It started out fine, a bit of a chill, but that was normal. Then the forest changed, thicker, darker, like it leaned in toward the road the deeper I went. The sun had dipped below the hills and my headlights were struggling. Fog rolled in, thick and fast, clinging low to the road like smoke from a fire I could not see. That is when I saw her, a woman on the side of the road, barefoot, hair long and tangled like vines, wearing what looked like a deer-hide dress. She did not wave, she just stared, and as I passed her, I swear she smiled with teeth that were too small and too many. I looked in the rear view, gone, not walking away, not fading into trees, just gone, like she never existed. I pressed the gas harder, suddenly desperate to get out, but the road just kept twisting. Every turn felt like I had driven it already. The same boulder, same dead tree, same broken mile marker that read PIK3 in rusted metal. I was looping, and that is when I noticed the scratching. Not on the car, in it, from the trunk, at. First I thought maybe an animal had crawled in when I packed, but then the scratching turned to knocking, rhythmic, 3 knocks, pause. 3 more, my stomach dropped. There was no way something was inside unless it had been there since I left the cabin, and I would have noticed weight. Sound something. I pulled over, heart racing, keys shaking in my hand as I stepped out. The fog was thicker now, dead silent except for the breeze that sounded almost like breathing. I unlocked the trunk and raised it. Empty, no raccoon, no gear shuffled, nothing disturbed, just 3 deep scratches in the lining, each one long and jagged, and then I heard footsteps. Behind me, on the gravel shoulder, I turned. No one, but there were footprints, bare and wide, with long toes like claws, leading around my car. And back into the trees, that was it. I slammed the trunk, jumped back in, spun the car around and started driving back. But the road behind me had changed. It was narrower, the cliffs closer, and now there were figures at the edge of the fog, standing perfectly still, some crouched, some hanging from low branches like animals, all of them watching, none of them blinking. Then one of them stepped onto the road, a man or something shaped like a man, but his skin was stretched too. Tight, eyes too large and sunken, and when I honked, he opened his mouth and let out a scream so loud it cracked my windshield, not from sound, from pressure, like it was inside my ears instead of outside the car. I swerved around him and kept going. The road dipped, then rose again. My tires hit something soft, like fur or meat, but I did not stop. I could see a light now, a distant porch light up ahead. Civilization, salvation. I pulled into a gravel lot next to an old general store. Abandoned, boarded windows, but that light was still glowing. And there was a man sitting in a rocking chair just outside the building, old, beard down to his chest. Eyes gray and blind looking. He said, "You took the pike, didn't ya?" I nodded, too stunned to speak. He smiled without warmth and pointed behind me. Go on back now. Keep driving west. Don't stop again. And if you hear him call your name, don't answer. They only need you to acknowledge him. That is how they get in. I did what he said, never took my foot off the gas. Eventually, the trees opened up. The fog lifted, and I saw the highway again. Signal came back. Time jumped. I had been on that road for 5 hours. It should have taken 30 minutes. I never found Devil's Pike on a map again. No one I ask has heard of it. And I have never driven in the Appalachians without a paper map and a full tank since. Because whatever that place was, whatever was watching me in those woods, it was not human, and it was still hungry. I was 31 when I accepted the kind of job that sounds simple on paper, but ends up leaving scars you cannot explain. A buddy of mine, Tanner, called me up late one night. He had a security gig way out in western North Carolina, deep in the Blue Ridge stretch. A private landowner wanted someone to watch over his property for a week while he was away hunting in Montana. Said it was 1,000 acres of old hunting ground. No buildings, just a cabin and a few trail cameras. No cell service, no neighbors for miles, nothing but trees, cliffs, and stillness. I had been laid off from the railroad 2 months earlier. Bills piling up. So when he offered to cut me in for $2,000, just to house sit and patrol the woods once in a while, I took it without thinking twice. The first day was uneventful. The cabin was old but sturdy, stocked with canned food, fresh water, and a wood stove. There was a CB radio for emergencies and a big stack of topo maps. The trails were poorly marked, but the land was beautiful. Old-growth pines, thick brush, a stream that glittered like glass in the daylight. But the weird thing was how quiet it all was. No birds, no squirrels, not even bugs. The whole place felt like it had been sealed in a jar and buried underground. I started doing perimeter walks each morning and evening, following the trails mapped out in red marker. And after the second day, I started seeing strange things. Bones, not animal bones like you would expect out here, but arranged bones, little skeletons tied together with hair and sticks, hung up in trees like wind chimes. Some were no bigger than a rabbit. Others looked suspiciously like tiny hands. At first I thought some local kids were messing around, or maybe it was part of some backwoods tradition. But then I found a camera, one of the trail cams, about a mile out from the cabin. It had been smashed, like someone took a rock and beat it to pieces, and next to it, in the mud, were bare footprints, wide, flat, with thick toes and deep heel impressions, like someone walked through with 100 pounds of pressure behind each step. And no shoes. I radioed Tanner. He laughed, said I was just spooking myself. That locals talk about feral families out in the Blue Ridge all the time, but they are mostly legend, inbred holdouts from 100 years ago, living off the land, afraid of the world. I did not laugh, because later that night I heard breathing outside my window. It was slow, heavy, like a dog with a collapsed lung. I killed the lights and crept toward the glass, too afraid to shine my flashlight. And just as I peeked through the curtains, a face met mine, not touching the glass, but right in front of it, pale, scarred, and covered in patches of matted hair. Its eyes were milky white, the nose broken or missing, but its teeth, too many, some cracked sideways, all of them filed to points. It grinned at me, like it knew I was watching. I backed away, grabbed the shotgun from over the door. When I turned the light back on, nothing, just fog at the glass and a single bloody handprint, too wide for a man, too narrow for a bear. I locked every door and window. Did not sleep a second next morning. I followed the trail toward the smashed camera again. I wanted proof, but what I found was worse. More bones, this time in a circle, with small animal skulls pointed outward like a warning. And hanging in the middle was one of the other cameras. Still blinking, still recording. I brought it back to the cabin and popped the SD card into the old laptop the owner left. The footage was grainy and dark, mostly wind blowing through leaves, until 3:23 a.m. That is when the motion sensor triggered and a figure stepped into frame. It was tall, maybe 6 feet 8 or more, thin but dense, wearing nothing but what looked like animal pelts draped over its shoulders. Its skin was pale and riddled with sores. Hair down to its waist in knots, but what chilled me was how it moved, not like a person, more like it was crawling inside the shape of one. Arms and legs jerking in the wrong rhythm, and behind it, 3 more followed. I paused the video and just stared. My breath felt stuck in my chest, because they were looking at the camera, not surprised. Not curious, they were posing, like they wanted to be seen, and in the last 2 seconds, one leaned in, whispered something, and though the mic barely caught it, I could make out the words, "You are already part of it." That night, I did not lock the doors, I barricaded them, moved the dresser in front of the front door, nailed the back windows shut, and kept the shotgun on my chest. I could hear them again, outside, walking, whispering in some guttural slurred dialect I could not understand, but I swear it had rhythm. Like a chant or a lullaby passed through rotted lungs. At 4 a.m., they tried to open the back door. Not violently, not pounding, just the rattle of the handle, back and forth, for 10 minutes straight. Then silence when the sun rose. I packed everything, radioed Tanner, no response, so I started hiking out. The trails were useless. They had been moved, no longer leading west toward the main road, but looping back, curling inward like a spiral. And every time I thought I found a clearing, I ended up back at the same dead tree, the one with a pair of jeans nailed to it, stained red, still dripping after 6 hours of circling. I dropped to my knees, exhausted, and that is when I saw the stone pile, a cairn, built from perfectly flat rocks, and on top, a human hand. Fresh, still twitching. I did not scream, I did not cry, I just ran straight through the trees. No trail, no map, just panic. Until I stumbled into a ranger truck near dusk, collapsed into the arms of a man with a badge and a sidearm. He took one look at me and said, "You were on McClare's property, weren't you?" I nodded. He just shook his head and muttered, "Fool never learns. That land ain't meant to be tamed." I told Tanner to lose my number, burned every map I had of that region, and to this day, sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear that same chanting, far off in the dark, closer than it should be. And I wonder if those things, whatever they were, ever really let me go, or if I just became another watcher, waiting my turn to call someone else into the woods. I was 33, working with a small nonprofit based out of Kentucky that partnered with local universities to study isolated ecosystems and old-growth forests across the Appalachian range. Most of the areas we surveyed were protected or untouched woodlands, meaning rarely, if ever, visited by anyone in modern times. Our goal was to document biodiversity, map out changes in the terrain, and log potential threats to the environment. We hiked deep into the region, specifically into a remote part of what's known as Burknife Gorge. It's not marked on most public maps anymore. Locals warned it had rockfalls, unstable ridges, and even stories of people disappearing decades ago. But to us, it was perfect. Pure, untouched, and silent. My crew consisted of 4 people. But on day 3 of our 10-day hike, I split off for solo mapping. We did this often. Each person covered a direction, marked paths, took samples, then rejoined at base camp. I walked about 6 miles southeast, through dense laurel thickets, barely cutting my way with a machete around. Noon, I noticed signs of human presence, old ones, stone markers in a half-circle pattern, worn flat by time and weather, and then something strange. A line of sticks stabbed into the ground, twine knotted between them like a fence. I followed it for nearly half a mile. That's when I saw smoke, thin, white, barely there, but definitely smoke, and then the smell of something roasted. I thought it might be another group of campers or hunters, though it made no sense. No one comes this far out. Even our own team required satellite beacons to check in. Every 12 hours, due to lack of signal, I crept closer through the brush. What I saw chilled me straight. Below the ridge I stood on was a sort of valley pocket, and nestled inside was a settlement, not ruins, not tents, actual living structures, mud and timber huts, some with smoke curling from stone chimneys. I counted 7 buildings, haphazardly placed with narrow dirt paths between them, and people at least 9 or 10. But they were off. Pale, gaunt clothing was made from stitched leather, fur, and what looked like patched fabric. I do not know how long I crouched watching, trying to process it. They moved differently, low to the ground, sometimes running on all fours, even the adults. And then I saw a child, except it didn't behave like any child I had ever seen. It crawled from beneath one hut, sniffed the air like an animal, then darted up a tree fast. Its limbs moved with unnatural speed, and it made a clicking sound like something between language and echolocation. I backed away slowly, heart thudding, but a twig snapped under my boot. One of them, a man or what looked like a man, whipped his head toward the ridge. His eyes locked with mine. I froze. His face was streaked with soot or ash. His mouth opened slightly, and then he howled. It was not human. It was a warning. Immediately, movement stirred through the huts. All eyes looked up, all turned toward me, and they started climbing. Not running, climbing up the rock wall between the valley and the ridge. I stood on fast. Too fast. He ran. Did not care about trail markers or direction. I just ran. Branches tore at my arms. I dropped my water pack. I heard them behind me, not yelling but whooping. A series of throat growls and yelps that made my bones shake. I finally reached the riverbed where our group had set base. I was bleeding, breathless. My teammates were stunned. I told them we had to leave. I tried to explain, but I knew it sounded crazy. One guy, Travis, agreed to go back with me the next day to see for himself, against my judgment. I said yes. We returned to the ridge, same route, but when we got there, everything was gone. No huts, no smoke, no signs of habitation. Even the stone markers I first saw had been pulled from the ground, as if nothing had ever been there, except for one thing: a pile of bones, neatly stacked, and on top of them, my dropped water canteen. We hiked out that evening, broke off the survey early, never filed that part of the report. Weeks later, I got a letter, no return address. Inside was a photo, blurry, black and white. It showed a woman, eyes pitch black, crouched inside a tree hollow. On the back was written, "You looked into our hollow. You will always be seen." I do not hike alone anymore, and I do not map what wants to remain hidden. There are tribes out there, deep in Appalachia, older than history, more primal than any animal, and they do not welcome maps or names or visitors. They watch, they wait, and they erase. I was 29 when I volunteered with a restoration project focused on historical religious sites, hidden deep in the Appalachian mountains. Most of them were abandoned chapels and frontier-era churches. My job was to photograph, record, and document the conditions of each building for potential historical preservation grants. I was assigned a location called Mount Grove Primitive Baptist. No real address, just GPS coordinates and a rough forestry trail that barely fit a four-wheeler. Locals warned me to avoid it. They told me that no one had stepped inside the building for decades. Some even claimed it was sealed from the inside. I hiked in solo on a late September morning. It took 4 hours of hiking and 3 creek crossings. The air grew colder the deeper I went. Not just shaded but heavy. Thick, like breathing through wet cloth when I reached the church. I stood frozen. It was still there, a one-room wooden structure. Its white paint peeled down to the bones. The windows were covered in thick soot, and the front door was nailed shut. Boards crossed it in an X pattern, each nail hand-forged. Old iron. I felt stupid, like I came all this way for nothing. But I circled the structure and found a broken spot along the back wall. Someone had kicked through the rotten boards years ago. It left a hole large enough to crawl through. Inside was darkness, not just the absence of light, something deeper. Like the church itself had swallowed time. I stepped inside, and the air was wrong. Thick with mildew and something else. It smelled like dried blood and wet ash. My flashlight cut through just enough to show rows of benches, an old pulpit, and a large wooden cross lying on the floor. Snapped in half. I took photos, logged the structure's damage. Everything was normal until I walked toward the pulpit. That was when I noticed it. The floorboards were too clean. No dust, no animal droppings, no webs, just smooth, aged wood recently. Walked on, and then I saw something worse. The walls were carved, not etched with scripture, but with faces, hundreds of them, each one different, each carved deep into the wood. Eyes, hollow mouths, open in what looked like screaming. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered, and I heard movement not outside, below me. The floor creaked once, then again, slow, measured. I stepped back, and the noise stopped. I left through the hole. I came in fast, but something told me to set up a trail cam, just one facing the pulpit from a broken window. I left it, then hiked back to camp. Told myself I was overreacting. I did not sleep well that night. I kept hearing a wooden knock, like something tapping against my tent poles. But when I stepped outside, nothing was there. The next morning, I went back for the camera. I expected dead batteries or an empty card. What I found was that the camera was missing, gone, no tracks, no sign of struggle, but nailed into the front door of the church was my camera's lens, bent inward, as if crushed by a fist. I should have left. I almost did, but something inside me needed to know, so I crawled back in again. The air felt worse this time, hot like breath. The carved faces on the walls were smiling now. I swear to God they were. And under the pulpit, there was an opening, a square hatch in the floor, partially uncovered. The edges showed fresh drag marks. I opened it. Inside was a ladder, leading into pitch blackness and the faint sound of something humming. Not music, not words, just vibration. I climbed down 12 steps, then stopped cold. At the bottom was a room, circular, carved from stone, lined with bones. Human, animal stacked high in ritual patterns, and standing in the middle was a man, or what used to be one. His skin was stretched too thin, eyes pure white, mouth sewn shut with thread. He held something in both hands, my trail camera, still blinking. Turned toward me, slow and ironic. Do not remember climbing the ladder. I just remember hitting the floor of the church, running full speed through the back hole, and not stopping for 5 miles. I never told the nonprofit what I found, but months later, I got an envelope in the mail. No name, no return address. Inside was a photograph, black and white, grainy. It showed the inside of that underground room. The man still standing, but this time he was surrounded by dozens of others, crouched, mouths sewn, all facing the ladder. On the back of the photo, a message was burned into the paper. Come back. We remember your face. I quit the project, moved 3 states away, but sometimes late at night, I hear faint humming under my floorboards, and sometimes the walls feel like they are smiling. I was 41 when my daughter Melanie disappeared while we were hiking the Pine Ridge Trail. It was late October, cool and cloudy. The fog had rolled in like smoke off a dying fire. We were 3 miles deep, no cell signal, no other hikers, just the sound of our boots crunching through wet leaves. She had been quiet the whole morning, which was strange since she normally filled the air with questions. But that day, she kept staring off into the trees. I asked if she was feeling okay. She just nodded, then whispered, "They are watching." I thought she meant animals, maybe deer or a raccoon, but her face, pale and still, made something cold settle in my chest. We reached a clearing where the fog had pooled, thick and low. Melanie stepped forward, slowly, like something was calling her. I told her to wait, but she turned to me, smiled faintly, and said, "I have to go now," then walked straight into the fog. I ran after her, screaming her name, but she was gone, like the air had swallowed her whole. For the next 4 hours I searched, my throat raw from shouting, my knees muddy. I found no trace, no prints, no broken twigs, just silence. By the time the ranger arrived, the sun was setting. They searched until midnight, then resumed at dawn, still nothing. She was gone for 3 full days. No food, no water, no shelter. The temperature had dropped into the 30s. Everyone said it was impossible for her to survive. Then on the 4th morning, she walked out of the woods, clean, barefoot and smiling, like she had just woken from a long nap. The rangers were stunned. She was examined by medics. No bruises, no frostbite, just a strange burn mark on her chest. A perfect spiral. When I asked her where she had been, she said, "With the quiet ones." I pressed harder. She looked at me and said, "They live underneath." After that, she changed, would not eat meat, would not touch metal, and never slept through the night. She would stand at her bedroom window, whispering to someone unseen in the trees, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes crying. One night I asked her who she talked to. She said, "The man who waits in the roots." I tried to get help, took her to doctors, psychologists. None of them believed me. They said trauma, said children invent things to cope, but I knew better, because one night I followed her. She slipped outside at 2 a.m. Walked into the woods behind our house, fog thick and low. I followed barefoot, afraid she would disappear again. She walked slowly, deliberately, then knelt beside an old oak tree and whispered, "I am ready." That was when the ground opened. I swear on my soul, it split with no sound, and from it rose 3 figures, pale, long-limbed, eyes glowing like coals. Melanie stood between them. She turned to me, smiled, and said, "You cannot stop the exchange." Then they all vanished. The ground sealed as if nothing had happened. I stood there for what felt like hours, then walked back home, alone, the next morning. She was in her bed, sleeping, as if nothing had happened, but the spiral burn on her chest was now glowing faint red over the weeks that followed. She stopped speaking altogether. Her hair began falling out, and her skin turned ashen and dry. But still, she smiled, always smiled. One night, I found her standing over my bed, eyes fully white, hands twitching, and she whispered in a voice not her own, "Soon you will be with us." I moved us to a different state, left the mountains, changed our names. But even now, 10 years later, she still goes outside on foggy nights, still whispers to the trees. And I swear, every now and then, I hear movement beneath the floorboards, like something rooting its way upward. I do not think she ever came back alone, or maybe she did not come back at all. Whatever came back in her skin is waiting for something, and I fear the fog will come again soon.